Welcome to PlaceTech Industrial and Logistics. I'm Paul Unger, editor of PlaceTech. We meet as this sector is enjoying record take-up driven by our online shopping that's kept us going this year. Today's warehouses are some of the smartest buildings in all of commercial real estate. There's more robotics, automated picking, sensors grabbing data. We're seeing developers pledge net zero carbon, which is having a huge impact on warehousing, and talk of recycling of buildings. Delivery speeds are getting faster. There's last mile logistics hubs replacing retail parks. Electric lorries aren't far away. There really is a lot to get excited about now in logistics and industrial. And this morning's session will cover all of that and more with a cross-section of experts from the coalface of what's going on in leading this sector into the future. This morning's session has been organised in association with our wonderful event partners, Arup, Node, Molcom, Mills and Reeve and Bruntwood Works. Please do join in with today's event, ask questions, make the most of the networking, pop your cameras on in the other room, double click away and work around the tables. In terms of format, there will be two halves with a presentation and panel in each half with networking in between. You can use the Q&A box in this section at any time to pop your questions in there, and I'll get to those during the panels. If you haven't done the networking bit before, I advise you to set up your profile. Only takes a couple of minutes. You find a pic, enter your details. When people click on you, they can see all about you. There's also private messaging in the chat functions here and next door as well, where you can see the list of participants, the attendees. Look out for people sending you messages, look out for the red dots, see if someone said hello or wants to connect. So let's get started. Fresh from his win last night at the UK PropTech Association Awards, where he was named PropTech Advocate of the Year, to demonstrate his passionate advocacy right now for you lucky people, please welcome Julian Carey of Stenprop. If you pop your camera on, Julian.
Morning.
Good morning. Okay, so if you want to click on the slide share, we'll just check that that comes up and then we'll get underway.
Can you
Wonderful.
See that?
Over to you. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me to present briefly before our panel discussion. I've been asked to come and just say a few words on actually a topic of my choice, but I've chosen data as it's something which is quite close to our heart and is quite relevant, I think, in today's day and age. So as Paul said, I'm Julian Carey. I'm Managing Director at Stenprop. I'm just going to take a little bit of time, about 10 minutes, to tell you why we think data is important to our business and I think other real estate companies. Give an example of something we've done recently in using data as part of our decision making, and then look at a few areas where we see room for improvement, which are focusing or big focuses of our business right now, and then really just a sort of a summary on how we're approaching the challenge and what Stenprop's doing about it in a real life context. So hopefully you can see my next slide. I love this quote. I think it sort of sums it all up quite neatly. Really that data drives decisions in organizations. We're all making decisions all the time, who to hire, what to charge, what assets to buy, what assets to sell. And all of these things really should be informed by data, but in reality, they often aren't. We have a sort of an ambition that when we're making a decision at Stenprop, the first question should always be, well, what does the data say? And then we should take that data into consideration when we're making our decision. Even when that does happen, and it increasingly happens, often we're still only using a tiny proportion of the data available to us when making those decisions. And it's our aspiration to increase that data set. We can use more and more different points to make better and better decisions. At Stenprop, we've mapped our data and we've just started implementing quite a long-term data strategy for our business. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But really, there's sort of three principal reasons why we've done that. The first one is that really we believe that in time, the data that we hold as an organization will become increasingly valuable as a part of our business. Things such as data provenance will become really, really important. And so we think it's important at this point in time to invest in that. Second of all, we believe that data is the fuel for all technology and systems, and that we believe that these systems and this technology can make our business better, more profitable, and operate more efficiently for the benefit of our customers. And then finally, that we can use this data, as I've already said, to make better and more informed and more timely decisions, which will mean that Stenprop has a competitive advantage over others who don't do that. So just to start with, I just want to look at an example of something that we've done recently where we use data to enhance our decision making. So this graph shows call center data that we have. So we have a call center where we take direct leasing inquiries from customers. So this is what I would describe at the very top of the sales funnel. This is sort of initial leasing inquiries. It's really the best benchmark that we have for customer sentiment right now, as it shows how many people are actively searching for space in any one given week or day of the year. So typically what you tend to see in the property market is that people are gauging tenant interest on deals done, which is very much a look back basis at data which is often a few months out of date, or at least a few months after these initial calls are made. Therefore, we think that this data set, which is these initial calls being received, gives a really clear picture of sentiment at the time. And what you can see from this graph is just how much it ebbs and flows over time. So, if you look at 2019, it was pretty stable. Things moved up and down. And then as we came into 2020, we had this big pickup at the start of the year, followed by a massive drop-off heading into to March 31st of March 2020. And then a very significant recovery, and then quite a big fallback again as we went into the summer, more recovery into September, and then falling away again as we entered into the sort of second lockdown. And this data is from up to the 12th of October. So what do we use this data for? It informs both our quoting terms on our vacant units and how we feel about the market, but we've also been using it for investment purposes. So it's not investment data, but it has a really big bearing upon our investment decisions. So we stopped investing at the end of March when the lockdown first hit, and we tried to conserve cash and make sure that we were going into the lockdown in the best position we could. But we were really surprised at the speed of the recovery inquiries that we saw in our portfolio as we went into, through. It started in the end of the first week in April and then grew rapidly all the way through to June, where we started seeing unprecedented levels of interest in the portfolio. And it was that strength of demand which meant that we actually actively decided to start reinvesting into multi-let industrial in April and May. And we completed our first transactions in June in early July, and there were further transactions which went through all the way through that quarter between June and September. And most importantly for us as a business, that enabled us to deploy £40 million into some really attractive priced opportunities at that time, when others were still looking to the market and seeing what the effect of lockdown was going to be, and ultimately just taking longer to come back in the market. We have seen a very significant pickup in demand from investors heading into October. Ironically, that's just as we saw the big drop-off in terms of inquiries. But I think that really is a lag and a delay from people really picking up on data which is live back in June, but taking 3 months to come through. So I guess this sort of leads us to 2 points really. One, that data which is used for one thing can often be very powerful in other parts of your business. And secondly, on a practical point, this data is being captured by one of my teams and is actually being used by a completely different team in my organization. And so it's really important in a company that people realize that they're not just capturing data for their own benefit. They can often be capturing it for others in the organization who really rely on that information further down the line. And I think that's a really big point when it comes to your data culture. So the second thing I was going to look at is what are we looking at? What's sort of on our radar at the moment? Where are we trying to improve the quality of the data in our organization? And I'm just sort of looking at a few different areas where we see some opportunity, and which is relevant to, I think, some of the panelists that you're going to hear from shortly. The first one is our lawyers. I like this photo, not just because it's quite timely and pertinent, and it may amuse me when I looked for a kind of a really tongue-in-cheek image of a lawyer, but this is obviously Dominic Cummings on his way out of work, but this could also quite easily have been one of our lawyers coming to us to report on the latest acquisition that we've been doing with their findings and the information that they've dug out. And really, you know, what we're seeing here is that it's not particularly helpful for us when somebody brings us a lot of paper, because we want to take that data forward and do interesting things with it. So, you know, obviously our lawyers, when we buy a building, they go through all of the data which is available, they check for issues, and they do tend to report back in that report format. They often upload that information to a data room, which is appreciated, so we can access it digitally, but the data is still relatively static within that data room. So it's fine from a transactional perspective, but it really doesn't get us anywhere when it comes to taking that data forward into the operations of those assets. You know, it's incredibly hard to use in a structured fashion. And the same is also true outside of acquisitions when we're doing lettings as well. So what are we doing about it? You know, the great thing about, I think, with our legal partners is that this is a very defined data arena with quite clear and consistent range of data points that we're looking to capture. So what we've done as a business is we've identified what our core building data points are, what we want to store in our system. We've expanded our system to be able to store more data points, and we're now working with our lawyers to provide that information in a templated format that we can import directly into our system, so we can use it going forwards. So this template covers, you know, all of our lease information in terms of terms and clauses, but also title information and other asset management information that we pick up through our due diligence. But there's a long, long way to go. I think in an ideal world, we'd also like to import more historic data, looking back for an asset from before our ownership, so that we can then track our performance relative to previous owners and see what we're doing well and what we're doing badly. And in my view, I think that historic data will have greater importance in future. I think buying a property will be a little bit like buying a classic car, which is, if it comes with a great degree of provenance and a well-documented history, it's ultimately worth more than a vehicle which has no history documentation and you don't know where it's been. So I think that's going to be similar in real estate. The other element that we're working on with our lawyers, which I think is also really relevant, is about simplifying transactions. Trying to take what we'd say, you know, copying Jeff Bezos, but trying to take the friction out of the process a little bit. So at Stenprop, we have two forms of lease. We have a traditional lease, which is agreed by our lawyers, and we have what we call our smart lease, which is done in-house. That's now accounts for about 65% of new lettings for us. The smart lease is generated digitally. It's done on iPad. It's signed online using DocuSign. There's no paper. There's no need for any lawyers to be involved. And I think where it's become really evident to us that this is beneficial is that actually those smart leases are twice as fast to put in place than when we have the lawyers involved. And interesting, largely because of that speed, and I think because of the simplicity, deals where we use a smart lease are also twice as likely to happen as those where we don't. So really profound impact upon that leasing process. And then finally, you know, customer satisfaction is an awful lot higher in that situation. And that's not just because both of our customers and ourselves are saving on our legal fees. They appreciate the speed and the simplicity. So not all leases are going to be that easy. We are dealing with a lot of high volume, relatively low value leases. I appreciate that, you know, other leases you need more thought to go into them. They require more tailoring. But I think that we need our lawyers to try and close that gap between our automated leases and our sort of handwritten leases. And I think there's a really big opportunity for them to do so. And I think if they don't, then there's a risk there that they become marginalized as standardization becomes more able to sort of encroach in that complicated leasing space. So that's the lawyers. If I move on to letting agents, which is another area where we work with about 70 different firms of leasing agents around the country at any one time. What you're looking at here is a dashboard from our digital leasing platform. So this element of frustration, I guess, is largely about sales funnel. So I mentioned it at the start with our leasing calls. We look at the sales funnel. You've got the top, which is capturing all your different leads from all your different sources, relatively poor quality lead information. and relatively poor quality leads. You then qualify them, and typically in a real estate leasing cycle, they tend to then move on to going into a viewing quite quickly, and then viewings become heads of terms, become lettings. So this dashboard is just a snapshot from our digital marketing platform. So Stenprop operates a digital marketing platform which itself generates about 6,000 direct leasing leads a year for our about 100 vacant units. That's on top of what we generate through our letting agents, who also use their own channels to source potential new customers. So this really represents the very top of that funnel. You can see it's about how many people have visited the website, how many unit pages have they viewed, where are they looking from, what are the most popular units that they're viewing, what locations are they searching in. And it's really good detail, and it helps us improve our processes. So it's a really strong indicator of general overall business health. It helps us deliver a better service to our customers because we can spot what they're looking for and maybe meet their needs a little bit better. And it also helps us refine our kind of lead generation process. Where are we seeing the most interest? What kind of businesses are looking? What sort of space are they looking for? What kind of channels are they looking for that space? And ultimately, if we can hone this and refine this, you get lots of green upward marks. Things are getting better. You get more leads, and ultimately, you do more deals. The issue that we have with our letting agents is that we don't get any detail at all on this part of the sales funnel from them. It's been something we've worked on for a long time. Arguably, all of these data points exist for our agents just as much as they do for us. How are they marketing? How many calls are they taking? How many are they rejecting, qualifying, quality, sectors? But we don't see any of that. We have managed to capture the rest of the sales funnel. We use VTS, and you'll hear from Charlie shortly from VTS. And actually, we have a very complete picture now of the lower part of that sales funnel. But we're still missing this top bit. So, what are we doing about that? We're trying to share a lot of this intelligence with our agency partners because we feel that if they can see the benefits of it, they may well implement it themselves. We're generally encouraging them to store more data and store it earlier in the process, and where possible, put it in VTS or share it with us in other ways. But ultimately, what we've done, as you can see, is we built our own top funnel marketing platform to provide that information. And I think that, again, the risk to the agents is that more and more landlords do this, and it makes them ultimately a little bit less relevant. And I think from a landlord's perspective, if you capture the top of the sales funnel, it's not too much of a leap to move further down it and start competing. So I think there's a risk there, but I think there's a really big opportunity for our agency partners to jump on that bandwagon. And then finally, and a little bit quicker, just looking at what are we doing with our customers. I think as an industry, there's an enormous amount of opportunity for the real estate industry to work more closely with their customers. There's a lot of mutual benefits from sharing data with our customers. For example, from a customer service perspective, if you share a portal with all your property information on it, it makes due diligence easier when you're moving in, makes deals quicker, less risky, providing help desks, giving tenants invoice histories. Ultimately, all of that puts a lot less strain on the real estate company trying to service those inquiries from customers, which are going to come about regardless. From an efficiency perspective, understanding a lot more about our customers' businesses will also help us help them in terms of their business efficiency. By way of example, I think in our space in multi-let industrial, most landlords, including us at the moment, don't really collect the bins and organise the bins for customers. So they all have their own separate bin contracts on a state of 20 tenants. That's 20 bin contracts, probably 10 bin lorries. It's not particularly efficient. And I think that there's a big opportunity if we really understood how our customers are utilising that service, that we could actually aggregate it, use the scale that the landlord has naturally to provide that service with greater efficiency. And then finally, on a headline basis, I think ESG is going to become more and more important. And I think that sharing data with your customers really can help both landlords and the customers improve their ESG credentials. So, solar in this image is a good example. Typically, if a customer wants to put solar on, they put it on their unit. They can only use the solar they generate, and when they're not using that power, it goes back to the grid at a much reduced rate. Actually, if a landlord employs the solar across a range of different units, they can then sell down that solar to whoever needs it at any one time, which basically means it's used much more efficiently. Everybody gets the benefit of that generated electricity on the estate at a better pricing. And And same for something like bins. Again, if you go back to that example, actually, if a landlord uses their scale, if they really understand the problem, they share that information with their customers, then a landlord can probably procure bin collection for their customers at no more expense than they currently pay, but could maybe ensure that all of that goes zero to landfill rather than to landfill. So big ESG gains there. And I think that, finally, I expect our customers are going to start asking for more information on their buildings anyway. ESG takes us down that path. And I think landlords need to be ready to provide that. So investing in your data infrastructure up front is going to make that an awful lot less painful. So finally, what are we doing about it? What does this mean in practice? What is Stenprop doing to try and improve its data? I've talked a lot about other people. I think this quote is absolutely spot on. We are a long way from being perfect. Even ultimately, as a landlord, we sit in the middle of a network of different companies who are working on our properties, whether that's agents, lawyers, contractors. We need to be able to provide data to them. We need to be able to retrieve data back from these organizations in an efficient manner. I think, and you want to own that data as well, I believe, as a landlord. Like I said, I think it's going to be hugely valuable in future. And I think if you outsource that to other people, then you're going to be missing out on a lot of value from your assets. So we need to put a data infrastructure in place which enables us to do that. And I think once we've done that, we can be a little bit more demanding on our partners to do the same, so that we can mutually benefit from the value that is created from this data. I think it's not beyond the realms of possibility that I think companies who are data enabled in future will probably not be willing to work with companies who are not. And I think that those people who are will be an awful lot more efficient and benefit from that. So what are we doing on the ground? This is a little slide I've nicked from Microsoft, but I think it's quite reflective of what's going on. Ultimately, we're putting data and the intelligence that creates right at the center of our organization. Now, we have selected Microsoft as our partner in doing this, and so largely because they have a pretty unique position. They're both a cloud operator, an enterprise software operator, and also a desktop software operator. So this diagram is generic, but it's also relatively true and accurate of what Stenprop are doing. We live in a time of relentless business transformation, where connecting your customers to your people and data really wins, and you need to find a really efficient ways of doing that. The key to enabling this success is how companies manage and leverage that data. And to quote Microsoft, it all starts with data. Data is coming out of everything. If you can harness that data, make intelligence out of it, and use it to improve your business processes, you're in a position to transform your company and your industry. And I think to compete successfully, companies need to use this data to actually within their business processes. But in today's world, the core business processes to engage customers, optimize operations, empower employees, and transform products are changing to be more and more digital in nature and less physical in nature. So you need to be able to capture that digital information if you're going to be able to improve your processes in the modern world. So to put it simply, we believe we can make our business more efficient in a digital way. So if we can make our business more efficient in a digital way, we will significantly improve on all the traditional physical equivalent processes that we do right now. And across our whole business, that will be very transformational. So we're doing it, as I mentioned, on the Microsoft Business Application Platform, D365, Power BI, Office, Azure, and so forth. But there are plenty of other alternatives out there. But that is just the technical element. The really challenging part is the cultural element. It's taken us at least as long to get our staff to be data literate and our business to be able to invest into technology rather than just look at it as a cost and spend on it, as it has to actually make these technical changes. And we feel that we're now on the way. And really, if you look at what's happened in the last 6 months with the coronavirus pandemic, it has significantly boosted our confidence that this is absolutely the right strategy, as it's sped up all of the trends. And people talk a lot about the speeding up of trends around coronavirus, but that really has led us down this path that data is going to become more and more important quicker than it was previously. And that's enough about data, and that's probably enough from me. So I shall stop there and hand back to the panel and to Paul.
Thank you. That's superb. Really, really fascinating. Thank you for sharing, for the insight. I'm sure there'll be people with questions coming through soon on picking up on the presentation. If I can ask our other panelists to switch your cameras on and your microphones, and we will get underway.
Hello, I'm Vanessa Curtis. I am a director within the advisory and transactions business at CBRE, working within the consumer and manufacturing sector.
Thank you. And Charlie?
Hi team, Charlie. So I manage the European business for VTS. VTS is a software or a prop tech company, and we help very much at the asset management level. Julian's alluded to, you know, the idea of a sales funnel, the idea of converting deals, the idea of managing your assets and the day-to-day customer interactions. We're supporting about 850 customers around the world across about 12 billion square feet. So yeah, it's been an exciting journey.
Wonderful, thank you. And Mike?
Yep, I'm Mike Edge. I head the real estate team in Manchester and Mills and Reeve. We act across all sectors, including logistics, and we act for all the stakeholders involved. So developers, landlords, tenants, funders, investors.
Lovely, thank you. Julian, I'm just reflecting on the great detail, the very comprehensive work that you've done over the last few years on your sort of digital journey. Do you feel that you're alone in the industry, or are there other people that that you can sort of work and share ideas and war stories with among developers and landlords?
No, we're definitely not alone. I think there's plenty of people out there doing some really amazing things. I think what we tend to find is that there aren't so many in our sector space. I think we have quite a unique business. I think it's important to note that, you know, we have best part of 1,000 tenants already in our portfolio, and that requires, it's very much a high volume, low margin kind of business, and in those kind of businesses, technology is extra important and has potential to deliver extra benefits. I think it is really really important to appreciate that from an industrial context. I think what we see by looking across to other sectors in the industry is plenty of other people doing really amazing things, whether that's in you know, equivalent to us, maybe student self-storage, PRS, serviced offices, obviously, as well. So, you know, there are companies in those spaces who have been doing technology for a lot longer than we have, and in many ways a lot more sophisticated than we are. I think it's just because I think in the industrial space, it has been relatively unsophisticated for relatively late in the day. But I do see, you know, there's plenty of businesses investing. So no, there's lots of people to talk to. I think what I would say is, as a general rule, though, is I think that the prop tech industry is on the whole ahead of the landlord industry side of the industry. So I think, yeah, as an overall view, that's probably relevant.
Okay, thank you. And Vanessa, if I can come to you, just tell us a little bit about some of the big players that you work with in industrial and logistics.
Yeah, so we work with a lot of global corporates. Not sure if I'm really supposed to name names, but big corporates who are doing consumer manufacturing. So people like Mondelez, who do all the Cadbury, the Oreo. People like Amazon are a client of ours. Some other players like Tetra Pak and Lego and British American Tobacco. So a lot of different types of manufacturing companies, but actually a lot of the same issues. And we work with supporting them not just on transactions globally, but really on their portfolio strategy and what they ought to be looking at and trends that could be impacting them, and then how that filters down into what they should be doing with their real estate.
Okay, and given the heat that is in this market at the moment, what are some of the strategic moves that people are doing that you're seeing right now?
So there's a huge focus at the moment on supply chain resilience. I don't think it's any surprise, you know, for the last 10 plus years, people have been doing offshoring to try and reduce costs. People have been whittling down inventory to try and reduce costs. People have been reducing the number of suppliers to reduce costs. And in the last couple of years, you know, natural disasters, political tensions, trade wars, and then a global pandemic, I think people have realized that actually that comes with a huge amount of inherent risk. And now the strategy is very much about de-risking that supply chain. So people are looking at things like business continuity, where their product is coming from, can they spread that out? You know, there's a lot of onshoring happening. You know, people are looking at thinking, previously they were thinking, well, it's cheaper to do it in, say, China, but that came with inherent quality risks. It came with a risk of consumers wanting to buy local. And now people are thinking, well, actually, if we want to ensure the quality, actually, if we want to de-risk the fact that we might not be able to get it back halfway around the world, you know, there's a massive logistics cost savings. There's a lot of onshoring happening. And then I think the same thing is happening in terms of supplier rationalization. We're seeing reversal there as well. Before it was, if we reduce the number of suppliers, we get it cheaper. That's great. Now it's, what if there is an issue with that supplier? Do I now expand that supplier base, look at what I can get where, particularly geographically, and try and ensure that I always have that continuity of supply regardless. So people are looking at that as well. And then in terms of inventory, again, you know, it doesn't take much of a disruption to your supply chain to have a really big impact on your profitability and your share price. And now people are thinking, actually, maybe I do need to hold a bit more stock of my component parts. Maybe I do need to hold a bit more inventory of my finished goods to cope with fluctuations in consumer demands. So that is impacting kind of where people are having their manufacturing locations, and they're trying to bring them closer to home. And it's also impacting sort of the amount of storage and warehousing that they're needing.
Yeah, there's so much flux, isn't there, at the moment? And Mike, does that echo what you're seeing at the interface of landlord and tenant work at the moment as you progress deals?
Yes, I think I would agree with what Vanessa said. There certainly is more onshoring. The difficulty is that demand exceeds supply. To some extent, that's a good thing if you're a landlord. But sites are scarce. You're often competing with other potential users like residential. But certainly, you know, onshoring is driving the market. We're seeing two distinct approaches, I think. We're seeing longer term leases, for example, you know, the 15-year traditional lease to the likes of Amazon. Then we're seeing the shorter term leases to DHL, who will match their term, the term of their lease, to the distribution contract. But what we're seeing with both of these, the key players, is that they're dictating terms. So picking up on what Julian said, I'm not sure about the image about the lawyer, but I agree largely with what you said. There is a move towards more standardization. So, but against that, you've got these big players dictating terms.
Yeah, and Charlie, tell us a little bit about how active VTS is in industrial.
Yeah, the team is very active. As I mentioned earlier, we've got over 800 customers and 12 billion square feet of commercial real estate. So that's office, industrial, and retail. And 3.5–4 billion square feet of that is the industrial side. Julian and Stenprop are of course a VTS client. I think Julian's being a little bit modest in saying that, you know, is Stenprop ahead of the curve compared to others? I mean, the answer is yes. Not so much in the tech that they're adopting. There is a lot of companies out there that are adopting really exciting technology. And the prop tech companies like ourselves, you know, half of our team are ex-industry, half our team are coming from the software technology side of the space. So we're a very powerful combination when we support clients in helping them to adopt technology and buy into the vision and educate them. But the reality is, and Julian touched on it, the cultural change that is required within your organization to adopt technology is very different to your company adopting technology. And so, you know, Stenprop, and they know this better than anyone, that doesn't happen overnight. Stenprop and Julian adopted technology as a business really early on. But in terms of really leveraging it and the whole team buying into it and everyone understanding Julian talked about them sort of being digitally native. You ask a question and the first thing you think about doing is, okay, well, what's the data telling us? Where do I go and get it? Let me have a look at that, rather than, well, it feels like, let me call, sorry, Vanessa, CBRE and see what they say. And then I'll come back to you tomorrow, Julian, and we'll have a bit of a conversation about what my gut says. And the anecdote in the market is this. And that is still incredibly powerful. I want to be clear. Like, I think brokers and agents and the market, I am ex-JLL. So, I believe this passionately that there is a place in the market for everybody, and that, as Julian alluded to, they can bring phenomenal value. But the day of anecdotes and gut feel, I just don't think it's good enough. And we're incredibly privileged that we get to spend a lot of time with industrial clients, sitting with the likes of GLP and Stenprop and CBRE and all sorts, from small logistics to big box, etc. There's three themes that crop up all the time, and I think Julian touched on pretty much all of them: data, the repositioning of assets, and ESG type conversations. We can't help with all of them. We're not the silver bullet. But when it comes to data, we really can. And we are passionate about supporting the client base and the industrial market in moving forward with their data strategy. There is a common belief amongst everybody we speak to that the industry has a problem with data. Doesn't mean they're not doing anything about it. And again, I want to give the industrial industry credit. I think that some of the individuals, Julian included, are more forward thinking than many in any other sector, any other space. But there is a problem. And the industry is kind of, the likes of Stenprop, the likes of what GLP is doing, and CBRE, with Philip Dunn there and Nick Hook, etc. These people can make a difference to the industry as a whole, and they all get it. And as they come together and start to spend more time changing the way that others think, I believe the industrial sector is arguably going to be more data-enabled, more tech-driven than perhaps any other sector in the space, or within our space, commercial, retail, industrial. And that's incredible, because if they can do that off the back of an incredibly strong market as well, that in itself creates quite an interesting, perhaps the underdog or the forgotten sector for so many years could leapfrog everybody else and become arguably the more dominant and more forward-thinking sector. So it's a really incredible time and exciting time in the market, in my opinion.
Have you seen an increase in inquiries for people wanting to adopt tech and test out your software during the last 6 months?
Yeah, I think the reality is the industry is changing and the industry is transforming, and that's been happening not just in the last 6 months. That has been happening for a long time. VTS is an 8-year-old company, and it's been happening at a steady pace over our 8-year journey. What has COVID and the pandemic done? It's been a bit of a forcing function to accelerate some of that change. I wouldn't say it's been a forcing function for people to be like, oh, I've got a problem. The industry knows where its challenges and its problems are. At the end of the day, the industry has been the master of outsourcing. And for all the right reasons, from lawyers to agents to operating partners to capital partners, there's so many different players involved when you think about an asset, that the very nature of how complicated that is makes it a really difficult challenge. And so I don't think the industry has been like, oh, we've got a problem. The industry knows they have a problem. But solving it is not easy. How do you connect all those teams and people and disparate data sources into one place? I mean, Julian alluded to it with the lawyer example, but there's so many other examples of how much of a challenge the industry has around data and information and collaboration, right? So I think that transformation started and has been happening, but COVID has really shone a light on perhaps how bad it could be if suddenly you're sat at home with a computer, your colleagues aren't around you, your property managers aren't on site, and you can't pick up the phone and find out what's going on. You haven't got your 7-ring binders next to you with all the Excel spreadsheets you need to quickly make a decision, or you're out and suddenly they're realizing, wait, that's not right. And the companies that perhaps are a little bit further on their journey than others, the likes of Stenprop, probably didn't notice as much business disruption as others. Teams could go home, log in, access their portfolio, could understand what's going on in real time, could collaborate digitally, had moved from offline to online. They were still driving their marketing funnels through all their digital demand channels, not relying on perhaps, the post box that is broker and sitting there waiting for your inquiries to come in when, JL and CBRE bring them to you. Again, incredibly important demand channel. I'm not belittling it, but there are other ways to think about, how you manage your assets. And again, it is really, really hard. but you've got to start that journey. And I think COVID's forced a lot of people to come off the fence and really accelerate that vision. So yes, inquiries are up.
Good to hear. Julian, I want to talk a little bit about budgets and the sort of cost, the money side of this, that there are companies obviously doing very well in industrial and logistics at the moment, and we're seeing acceleration of all sorts of trends. But equally, there are pressures in the economy, and people will be wondering how to deploy cash, what to do best with their budgets. Can you sort of give us a flavour within the realms of what you were willing to share, of what you think you've spent on sort of the digital journey over the years?
I think what we've done is we kind of played around the edges. Like I said, learning to invest in technology was the big turning point for our business, and it took some time. I think until then we just looked at it as a cost. And how do we mitigate that cost with some other savings elsewhere, rather than saying, okay, we need to invest in this and the benefits will come later. And actually, if you do it the right way, then the benefits are much greater if you invest in it than if you're just trying to offset a few costs here and there. So we kind of moved from the sticking plaster to a much more significant investment. Without going into full detail, which I can't for a few different reasons right now, but I just look at it a slightly different way. If you've got your business, what percentage of your asset value do you feel that is reasonable to invest in something which can have a profound, multi-basis point impact upon your profitability every year going forwards, right? And if you look at it in that way, and if you think about it in a real estate context, well, if I invest £1, I want to be able to get 7p a year return on that pound, and I want it, into perpetuity. If you think about it in that way, well, actually, if I can make a 5% improvement in my underlying profit, what multiple of that should I be willing to invest into technology to deliver that? And I think what's quite exciting about the technology and that we've been looking at and we're investing in is that the returns on the technology are much better than the returns you're getting on the real estate assets. You need the real estate assets to generate the benefits of the technology, but this is a real way of turbocharging those returns. And I think us as a business, we're not looking at investing anything close to a kind of a real estate type multiple in the returns that we're getting. But should you invest 0.1% of your net asset value, or 1%, or 5%, or 10%? I guess it all depends on what the opportunity is and what sector you're investing in, and how ready you are to make that investment, and I think one of the really big challenges about it is how good are you at measuring the success. I think one of the things which has been profound to Stenprop in terms of investing in technology is having some early wins, being able to say, okay, we did this is the economic return of that. Wow, isn't that great? Okay, well, maybe we can invest 50% more next time, or 100% more next time, because we can see that these returns have come through. And that is one of the reasons why, as Charlie sort of alludes, it takes time, is because you can't really go from being a sleepy real estate organization to Google overnight. To make that leap of faith it just takes a long time, and I think that's part of that incremental evolution of investing in technology. Trial and error.
I just want to pick up one thing there, Paul, and I promise I won't talk again. But the idea of quick wins is really, really important. And with Vanessa and Mike on the call, there is an example of where you can get some really quick wins. I think a lot of our customers are understanding that, okay, if the industry has a problem with data, and if the industry has a problem with its structure and how to collaborate and everything else, okay, well, let's look within our business and our team at what we can control. One of the things that you can control really quickly is understanding your customer, understanding your tenant. Julian talks a lot about, spending time with tenants. Technology can really help and support you in the customer journey, whether it's lead to lease, in the initial experience the customer feels when they're looking for your space, through the conversion cycle, to then becoming a tenant and one of your customers, to the customer satisfaction afterwards, right? In terms of, okay, what are our customers doing? How can we support them? How can we align our real estate strategy with what they really want? And again, technology can play a really, really big part, and very, very quickly be deployed to support you with the customer journey and, I guess, sentiment and satisfaction. And that would be a very quick win, because it's low cost in the grand scheme of things. It's high return. It's really quick and easy to adopt. And of course, I'd say that because it's where we focus our time. But most importantly, like, you get the quick wins, and it starts to change the culture and bring people together, right? Which is what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be a positive mindset, the investment mindset. Vanessa, are you seeing some of those big players you work with investing in research and development, and how is that sort of playing out in their estate strategies?
Yes, we're seeing a huge amount in R&D at the moment. There's a big drive in terms of customer centricity. And there is a big drive in terms of digitization. So there's R&D in kind of actually product, and then there's R&D in kind of systems and technologies that support. All of that's needing cash generation. So people are looking at sale and leaseback as a way of generating that cash to reinvest into R&D for new products or into new platforms which support them. They're generally looking at their kind of key assets. You know, generally these corporates, they own freehold a lot of the key manufacturing facilities that they have a long-term investment into, and they lease kind of offices which can move around a lot more easily. And they're looking at those key assets now and thinking, could they do sale and leaseback? Could they reinvest those funds into R&D? Obviously, there's a big drive to retain control. They want to know that they can still do with that site as they want. So they're looking at the rights within that sale and leaseback and how that's structured. They're also looking at making sure they can have a buyback option at the end of whatever term. But yes, that's happening quite a lot at the moment as well.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Thank you very much. Mike, how does this have implications when you're doing deals and you've got these new products, the softwares, the sensors, the sort of outcomes of all this R&D period that we're going through? Does that present challenges?
It can do. I think just picking up on Charlie's point about collaboration, which will answer your question. There is greater collaboration, not just between clients and lawyers about the sharing platforms and sharing data, but the same, I think, in the landlord and tenant relationship. I think that both parties recognise the importance of environmental improvements, and the negotiation is about who's going to pay for them generally. But there are benefits for both parties, of course. It's market driven. Investors like to see green buildings, so do occupiers. Tenants, of course, can save money if their environmental improvements are made. And there's also the point, of course, that if a tenant sublets, it's the landlord itself. So there is a mutual benefit in collaboration, and I think we will see more of it. But as Charlie said, it doesn't need to be embraced, I think, for there to be increasing progress. There's been a lot of progress which has been accelerated by COVID, but there's still a way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about those sustainability measures? What are some of the things that will sort of play out through leases and have a material impact? I think we can still hear you. Just come up with a message that the camera might be weak.
It's to deal with, obviously, a lot of it's to deal with energy consumption, occupancy levels, waste management, air and water quality. Those are the sort of provisions which people are keen to see and implement. And at the end of the day, it's, as I said, to the advantage of all the stakeholders involved in the process. So, but it's a question of how those are dealt with in documents. Can they be installed through the service charge? If so, the tenants obviously will share the cost. Is the landlord going to pay for them? You need express provisions in the documents if the landlord is going to seek to pass on the cost. I think sometimes you get landlords thinking they can perhaps interpret a repairing covenant or an obligation to comply with statutory obligations as meaning they can recover the cost. But the safest way to proceed is to have a proper negotiation about it, and have express provisions in the lease.
One thing I'll just add on ESG, and this has been an interesting theme and something we've had a lot recently, is that the conversation is starting to evolve from the environmental impact and side of ESG, reducing carbon footprint, etc., to an ethical one. You know, investors are asking questions about, okay, who are the tenants? What is their impact on society? You know, I'm investing in you, but I need to know a lot more about who you're in bed with. And that is creating in itself a whole host of challenges for the industry. When we talk about data and information, and I say like the quick win is sort of know your customers, get closer to your customers, understand your tenants. It would probably surprise a lot of people just how many can't, you know, just quickly access, particularly large portfolios, information around their own customer base. Again, Julian's better placed to talk about this, but it's been interesting to see that shift. It's environmental is still top of the agenda and very, very important, but investors also bringing the pressure around ethical and social responsibility is an interesting trend.
Yeah, Julian, do you want to add anything in terms of the sort of noises that you hear from customers?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think picking up on Charlie's point, it's as much, it's symptomatic of what the future lies, you know, holds for us, I think, which is that at the moment people are saying, oh, ESG, what do I want to know? I want to know, yeah, what do your customers do? What sort of sectors are they involved in? You know, how are they using the building? No, I don't want to know that they're in aerospace. I want to know whether they're using it for distribution or manufacturing or storage or whatever it might be. And I think that's going to be more and more commonplace, especially if you're working with external capital partners who have lots of different questions to ask, in my experience, on lots of different things which maybe wouldn't occur to you or aren't relevant to you as an operating partner. And I think, you know, where the crunch comes, you know, because Charlie, you know, it's a great case in point, because should it be that hard to be able to tell somebody what your customers do? It shouldn't be that hard, should it? Really, let's be honest. But the reality is that most of us are operating on systems which don't have a field for storing that, right? And we also have processes in place where there isn't a stage for somebody to put that data in, or we're outsourcing that requirement to somebody else who isn't interested because they're not being paid to do it, right? Or they're not being motivated, at least, to do it. And I think for us, that's where, you know, the change in terms of how we're approaching this stuff is a much more long-term view, which is, look, we need to capture a lot more data points, not because we need them now necessarily, but because we're just likely to need them in the future. And the time saving of being able to pull these things up at the tip of your fingers is huge. You know, I was talking to a capital partner, and they were saying they're a global investment management business, and they have lots of different partners on the ground operating assets for them. And they were saying that it takes them about 6 weeks to figure out what their weighted average unexpired lease term is across their portfolio. You know, and the problem is that they could have a really great data integration team to work with all their partners, but they wouldn't have anybody on the other side who can do anything, right? So that's where all this stuff comes back. So ESG is an absolutely classic case in point. We're going to get asked for more and more and more ESG data. It's not going to be long before your capital partners are saying, show me how much utilities each of your customers using, even if you don't supply it, because we need to know, because it's within one of our premises, you know. And if you're not putting the building blocks in place to do that, and that will probably require a comprehensive redesign of your underlying data systems, you're going to be up against it, and you're going to disappear into a mire of admin forevermore. So we need to do it just because it's coming. If nothing.
Don't let Julian scare everyone into thinking that, you know, technology, you know, you do all these massive things in the short term. One of the things we do push, and Julian will attest to this, is in the early days, if anyone out there is thinking about how to advise clients or talk about this in a constructive way, don't talk about some of these big things that are going to talk about them in the sense that they're around the corner. AI, blockchain, blah, blah. Yeah, it's great, and it's nice to educate people, but it feels so far off or so unattainable or just unrealistic that it's hard for people to get off the fence and start the transformation journey. Talk about some of the basic things. Can you pull a tenancy schedule on any one of your assets anywhere in the world right now and understand who your tenants are and what they're paying you? At a click of a button. Don't call anyone, don't do anything, pull up your mobile phone and answer that question. If you can't, maybe you should start with the basics of being able to give, you know, put the technology in the hands of your front office teams, your deal doers, and then that will start a catalyst to them being and wanting more. Okay, now I want that. I want to be able to click a button and see my rolled up exposure to Amazon and all the leases we have and Zappos and Whole Foods and everything that sits there. And now I want to know what they do in all of those buildings. And now I want to know, and it will start a journey of the cultural change management with an organization. If you start up here, you're going to leave so many people in your organization behind, and they'll just think that, you know, you're playing away with the fairies. So again, anybody who's listening and is thinking about, okay, we really need to do this, whatever you're doing, the basics is right. Start there, get it right, change your culture, but do think about the guys and girls on the ground that are actually at the coalface doing deals, talking to investors, talking to tenants. Empower them, and you'll be on your way to sort of changing your culture and organization, is what we see anyway.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And Vanessa, I just want to talk a little bit about the models that we're seeing in the sector. We've heard a bit about things sort of bleeding in from offices and other sectors. Are we seeing the same sort of wave of flex space coming in? Is that something that really features, or is that not going to happen?
It's happening in a fairly big way, and I think it's being driven mostly by a talent attraction and retention need within industrial occupiers, manufacturing occupiers. You know, we've talked a lot about data, we've talked about digitization. You know, I know everyone's avoiding saying it, but Industry 4.0, and the fact is that these large commercial occupiers are now needing to attract a completely different talent set, really. They need to attract people who can write software programs. They need to attract data analysts. They need to attract people who are coming out of universities, who want to be in cool hub locations with a lot of facilities and coffee shops and gyms and bars. And those grads don't want to be stuck in a shed in what they consider to be a grade B location. They want to be in the cool place. So what we're seeing is that people are employing flex office space as a way of kind of attracting those talents in those really desirable, officey, cool locations that have all those facilities, and maybe looking less at making use of the office space within the manufacturing facility to try and house those people. So as those units become more automated, as we don't need quite so many people in those buildings, it's possible that you may see a portion of office to manufacturing change within those units, and people using things like flex to make sure that they have cool office locations, and of course technology platforms. I mean, industrial occupiers have suddenly found that actually all of those people who are doing like finance, back office and customer service from within a manufacturing unit don't really need to be in it. As long as they've got, you know, Zoom, some access to Office 365, then they're good. So they will find increasing demand for office that's kind of away from the manufacturing.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Thank you for sharing that. We'll draw things to a close there. That was brilliant. Thank you very much to our panel. Please give them a round of applause at home, wherever you are watching. We'll nip through now, talking of attraction and talented people. This is your chance to shine in the networking room. Do please pop on your cameras and dive in. You might even enjoy it. And we'll be back here at 11:30 for the second half. Thank you. Back into the presentation room. Delighted next to welcome someone who's going to give us a specialist tech point of view from inside the world of industrial and logistics. For our second presentation, please welcome Klatt from Disruptive Technologies. Uwe, if you pop your camera on. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Cool.
Thanks for joining. And if you want to share your screen, we'll get the slides underway and then I'll step out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paul. And pleased to meet everyone virtually. I hope to be able to chat a bit after this talk as well. My name's Uwe Klatt. I work for a Norwegian company called Disruptive Technologies. I have the pleasure to be talking about how to get to industrial operational data today. Here at DT, I'm the VP of Sales. I'm based here in the UK, in beautiful Yorkshire, Leeds. Yes, and we as a company make what is the very smallest wireless sensor that is commercially available. And I'll be talking to you about that, and also what the sensors then do in industrial and warehouse environments specifically. So very quickly about what the product is. So all of the sensors are really, really small, and I'll just hold one up for you. They're literally like this. They are 19 by 19 millimeters. They weigh 2 grams. They last 15 years. So that's the battery life of a sensor, the typical battery life. And they're completely wireless. So this is a piece of sustainable tech. All you need to connect it up is really this little piece of gateway. We call it a cloud connector because it's so easy to just literally plug this in and start sending data. Now the sensors all look the same. So they're this form and shape and weight of 2 grams as well. And we have just different types of sensors that you see gathered up on the slide, from temperature through, humidity over to water detectors and proximity sensors as well. I have added, since it's coming quite soon, we're prototyping in December and January, 2 new sensor types that are for tilt and vibration, obviously also for this more industrial space. That can be 2 very interesting sensors to look at. And the way this then works is, so all of these connect up to what we call the cloud connector. It can be many thousands. So in one specific warehouse, we do have 2,000 sensors in one warehouse connecting to multiple of these cloud connectors. The data is then sent on to our cloud, DT Cloud is called here, where it's being picked up, both in terms of, we do offer a web application to get to this data, but more importantly, for anything productive, we connect to third-party applications through open programming interfaces. So the real uses here are in industrial platforms, in productivity solutions, in workplace solutions, and things like PTC ThingWorks for the industrial space. That's where the action then happens. Okay, so to make this more tangible and hopefully more interesting as well, I'll show you some of the applications in this space of industrial solutions in a second. But I want to make this point here. We hear about sustainability all the time, and this is what we as a company stand for. So we've built the sensor to enable sustainability in existing environments. So you don't have to rip and replace, you actually retrofit. That's why the sensors are so small. We can really get to where you need data from. The long-lasting properties of the sensor make it, a very resourceful product as well, in terms of not generating so much waste and really enabling assets to be smart today. So that's all great. I want to be making one point before we get started on the solutions. These sensors completely self-install, so you don't need technical expertise either. So you literally just peel off the label at the back, stick them on, start sensing. So all you need to do really is plug this in. It has cellular data. All it needs is power. If you do have it, it does have Ethernet as well, but it's not needed to operate the solution. So literally plug it in, stick the sensor where you want to measure, and start working. So a few examples of what the sensors do. So here's a complete list. As you will see, looking from smart cleaning to desk occupancy, there are a lot of office-based, workplace-based applications too that we'll not focus on today. Our single largest client today uses an application we call remote monitoring. This is already half industrial. It is about properties, but it is about understanding what a remote property is like at the minute. So it's health monitoring of remote properties, which has gained some relevance in the current climate and the current environment of lockdowns happening and people not quite knowing what might happen to remote assets and properties. So that's our largest application. However, at the bottom here, the power grid is an interesting application area for us, and so are other sort of hard facility management and industrial applications. So let's dive into a few of them. And I'll start with this one. This is a warehouse that I'd like to discuss. It's a fulfillment warehouse for online ordering of certain items that are some of them need to be chilled and some of them don't. So this is a warehouse that has hundreds of conveyors to sort of transport totes that are then being filled with product through the warehouse at picking stations. So that is the application area for the sensor. Now, what do the sensors do? You see a temperature sensor here mounted on a conveyor. Temperature in terms of understanding how this piece of equipment behaves. What our customer here does is to analyze patterns of temperature and to understand when bearings, when drives, when conveyors themselves are about to have a problem or even break down. So through this type of modeling and analysis of temperature data, they managed for some of the most vital components in this warehouse, in these conveyors, lifts, pulleys, etc., to reduce production incidents by more than 50%. So looking then at the cost of each incident, which is thousands of pounds per incident, that is a massive saving to them. The other dimension here, where real-time data from an environment like this can help, is scheduled maintenance. So maintenance happening every, let's say, half year or every 9 months. They managed to increase their maintenance windows by 67%. So maintenance has to happen a lot less often. Again, saving cost and resulting in the complete warehouse being kitted out with our sensors. So that is one area that is industrial where we're able to help. Looking more in commercial building related maintenance engineering types of applications, I wanted to point this one out here. This is something we do together with Integral here in the UK, but also a few other service partners. This is our sensors, and you see it quite small here, circled in red, being used to understand temperatures on water pipes and specifically near outlets. Now, this is all about SFG 20 and regulations to inspect and make sure that taps are being flushed enough in order to avoid stagnation and buildup of Legionella bacteria and spread of Legionnaire's disease. So with this visibility, again, retrofit, again, sustainable tech, nothing being ripped out, just this fitted onto a little bracket, which then goes on a water pipe. They're able to save both on-site visits, and the stat here is quite interesting. It's 81% of time spent on on-site inspections like this. 81% can be avoided. On the side, also, we save 2.5 tons of carbon across one building, and we save all this water that now does not need to be flushed. And two more examples, maybe. I hope I'm okay for time. It looks like I might have another couple of minutes. Here's an example from the time of lockdown during this pandemic here in the UK. This is a restaurant chain with 100 outlets across this country. Now, within 3 days, the freezers containing food for these restaurants were kitted out with DT sensors due to their very easy retrofit properties. And we're now monitoring all of these freezers across the restaurants, have been able to identify 13 phrases that have problems so far, and protecting assets worth of over £1 million like this. So again, demonstrating how easy it can be to monitor more industrial type assets. And the last thing I will mention today is our application area in electrical power, especially in power distribution networks. We are helping DNO, so distribution network operators, to gain visibility on their transformer substation equipment, to understand both, in times of change of energy over to green energy, to change how certain power assets are being loaded. So this is reflected in temperature, but also to perform safety and security related tasks on substations that can be out in the country. So door openings are of interest here, water ingress is of interest. And again, all the systems properties come into play here, being really easy to retrofit, not having to integrate with any networks, and just being ready to go. So final word about DT. So DT, Norwegian company, has just won one of our Dantix's awards for mixed development and smart building innovation. So we've been widely recognized by a few players, and you see this mix here of both industrial awards looking at free electrons, and then also real estate and building related awards. So I think we can be a quite interesting party to talk to when it comes to digitization of industrial and smart building assets. So that's it from me for this talk. Thank you very much, Paul. Over to you. I'll stop my sharing and I'll turn my camera off.
Wonderful. Thanks, Uwe. Yeah, if I ask our panelists to pop their cameras on. So welcome back, Uwe, and others. And hi, Kevin. Here we go. Hi. We'll start with a little round of introductions. Kevin, if I can start with you, please. Just say who you are, where you're from, what you do.
Yes, certainly. Good morning, everybody. I'm Kevin Theobald from Tritax Symmetry. I head the construction team and responsible for the procurement and delivery of new developments across the UK in the logistics sector.
Thank you. Simon?
So Simon Evans from Arup, as you've probably guessed from my name on this platform. And what I do at Arup, I look after digital within our energy sectors. And by digital, I mean how we can use internet era technologies to somehow enhance and enable the way we do design, delivery, and operations. The second part I'll mention is I work closely with the Centre for Digital Build Britain and the National Digital Twin Programme. And as part of that, have a big keen eye on Arup's response to how digital twins are going to impact us as an engineering consultancy.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to start with the panel's thoughts on yesterday's announcements from the Prime Minister and other ministers about the 10-point plan towards a green industrial revolution in this country. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts, how this relates to property and specifically back to industrial and logistics. Simon, is that something you've had a chance to digest overnight?
Absolutely, yeah. And for us, we really welcome this 10-point plan. This is the green industrial revolution, as it's been termed, and what it's going to try and do to bring us towards net zero. So it's probably that big step that's been needed towards a sustainable energy system. I think some might say that the list is too wide, but I think the reality is the task is quite great. So all of the strategies and all the 10 points, which if you haven't read them, are broadly around how we can focus on hydrogen, offshore wind, nuclear, electric vehicles, particularly net zero transport, carbon capture and storage. One of the main ones, I think, fascinating, green finance, and then the protection of our nature as well. And that list is broad, but we will need all those strategies in order to get there. And it's really about making sure that the tech and the options that we follow are really open to innovative solutions. And we're not kind of constrained by what we've done in the past. But I think the real question, and be interested to hear the views of the panel here as well, is the challenge is how we can actually do this and deliver this in a coordinated way, because we need to do it rapid, we need to do it in an agile method, but we need to understand really what the incentives are. So what are the mechanisms, what new markets can deliver these 10 points, and how, and kind of to my roots, can we consider digital and data, and particularly the concepts of a digital twin from the outset. And for me, that feels like a great area of debate that will come off the back of this.
Yeah, a lot of detail to work through. Kevin, as a developer, when you're looking at that announcement, what are your thoughts?
Certainly very encouraging, and I think we should applaud the government in announcing the plan. Everybody will have their own particular views on it. The bits that interested me particularly were those around the energy and the offshore wind power. I think that energy is going to be a very big focus for all of us in the very short term, in terms of the sustainability and low carbon agenda, and particularly in the logistics sector, is probably going to be the biggest challenge ahead of us in the next few years.
Yeah, quite right. And Uwe, want to add your take on that plan?
Yeah, I mean, we welcome the plan. We find it touches on some areas that we try and address as well. Greener buildings certainly being one of them, where we feel we can make a technical contribution. To Simon's point, however, it's the question will be around delivery. So we understand our part in this in a tiny piece of tech. However, we do understand this needs to be connected to a service to deliver it, and to also to overall solutions to embrace it. So we're just one small piece of this overall puzzle, but both for greener buildings and also then decarbonization in terms of the switch to green energy. We think IoT and sensors have an important contribution to make, and we're looking forward to doing that.
Absolutely, need to be able to measure it to manage it, as they say. And Simon, you've mentioned digital twins a couple of times. Just for the uninitiated, can you explain what a digital twin is and why it matters?
It's kind of a pick your definition. It means many things to many people, as I'm sure loads in the call have experienced. The real simple way of defining it, and the reference text I use as the Centre for Digital Will Britain, and their kind of definition of it is that it's a representation of something real, not necessarily something physical. And that representation is in a digital form that allows you to do many great things with it. So in simple terms, a digital representation of a real asset or system or process from which you can derive insights and do some really great things. Ultimately, what it's talking about is converging a physical and digital world in some capacity. And I think the really key and interesting point for this audience as well is when we hear the word digital twin mentioned, most people will consider it a product or technology, like I'm going to buy a twin or procure a twin and it will solve my problems. That's not the case. Just like there's not one program you can use to make a CAD model or one word processing program you can use to write a Word document. It's really about the process and methodology that comes with it. And that process and methodology is underpinned by data as the core of it. And that data is fundamental to what the twin represents. So kind of snapshot is it means many things to many people. Best person to look or best organization to look at is the Centre for Digital Will Britain and their definitions. But the crux of it is all down to data and using it for their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of your sort of place at the heart of the energy and digital world at the moment, what are some of the main trends for people to watch out for, would you say?
So for me, I think the biggest trend, and it's looking at some wider agendas we're seeing as well, is all around the interchange and the exchange of information and data around the energy system. So most of us as consumers, of course, we just use the system. We don't always understand all the complexities within it. But the energy system over time has become more and more complex. It's more energy vectors or generation sources being introduced, particularly with the 10-point plan being released, like how is the hydrogen economy and that as a generation source going to come into play. And it's made it more fragmented, but also given a great opportunity. And there's a great piece of work that's happening at the moment being led by Ofgem and a number of the parties called the Energy Data Task Force, which is driving a way of exchanging, allowing the information and data between the energy system to flow more freely, allowing from that ultimately the market to create better services and offerings for the end consumer. So for me, the biggest trends are happening is we're seeing the energy systems getting much more complex, much more connected. How does it then respond and adapt to that demand from the consumer? But also, how does it consider future trends, like what is it going to mean to convert 20 million homes from methane gas to natural gas over the next 15 years, 20 years to get to net zero? That's a huge challenge. And how can we do that in a pragmatic and data-driven, and I hate the term data-driven because I think it's also a bit of a misnomer and a bit of a platitude, but in a way that sets ourselves for smart assets for the future that are, as Uwe's kind of shared some of his sensors, using all those latest technologies to capture information and provide a more right time. And I'm using right time here, not real time, because I don't know if anything needs to be always real time. It's about the right frequency based on what you're trying to do, and in a right time monitoring to provide right time outcomes.
Yeah, okay, that's great, thank you. And Kevin, you've at Tritax Symmetry, you've made some bold pledges around low carbon energy use, etc. Do you want to sort of tell us a little bit about what you're doing and where that's up to, please?
Certainly. Well, over the last 12 to 18 months, we've moved away from just the low energy agenda and efficiency agenda into the low carbon agenda. When UKGBC issued their framework definition for net zero carbon, we felt we could align with that. So we actually embraced the Advanced Net Zero campaign from UKGBC. And we've been working very hard over the last year or so, piloting our base buildings and understanding our product in terms of the carbon that both embodied within it and also in its operational use. And we found that we've built quite a detailed model now with Scott Hughes, who are our low carbon consultants. And we understand the embodied carbon in our base buildings. We've built a very complex model to measure that carbon. And we have initiatives whereby we reduce that carbon on a project by project basis. At the end of each project, we will be in a position now for all developments in our portfolio to be declared as net zero carbon in construction, in accordance with the UKGBC framework definition. And we're working very hard with supply chain and indeed with occupiers to move towards an aspiration to achieve the net zero carbon in operational use, again, as defined by UKGBC in that definition. We're very keen to be collaborative and work and push the sector as a whole to improve the low carbon agenda. We're currently working with UK BCSD and Prologis, and we will be issuing some white papers in the short term, which is promoting working together in the industry and trying to develop best practice across the industry and the sector, such that we can bring in supply chain all the way through to occupiers and work with us to improve the position.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. And Uwe, you've obviously working with some large companies in industrial, manufacturing, retail, warehousing. Have you noticed a change during the pandemic in the appetite for trying new things?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I feel at the beginning of the pandemic there was a state of shock, and everything just came to a grinding halt. However, quite quickly this turned into sort of looking at the restaurant example I gave there. People were looking for solutions, literally, to deal with this crisis short term. So it sort of highlighted the importance of tech that has been around for a while to help people not having to do things in person, not having to do things with an engineer on site, but actually making use of tech. I think this calls another example of it, right? So anything that helps you conduct your business remotely got highlighted, and that concerns video conferencing, but it also concerns IoT. So we saw that happen, and that one client who I mentioned, our largest, turned into our largest clients over the last 4 months, which was literally from about 1,000 sensors to 15,000. Now this is monitoring properties and monitoring health of properties and not sending people. So yes, we've seen an effect of the pandemic, certainly in the smart building space. And we think this effect will now help us going forward also create greener buildings, which is interesting. So it's sort of accelerated. It's been leading into this green transition, which will happen anyway, we believe. It's just been accelerating that. As far as the, our grid customers go, I think that transition was not necessarily touched by COVID so much. I think that transition has been going on for a while, where people try and understand how to better plan their power networks, how to deal with decentralized power generation. I think those are the issues and the problems that the industry needs to deal with, where we can at least play a part and help. So that wasn't so much influenced by COVID, but that it sort of serves the same or similar purpose towards this greener world.
Yeah, and similarly, Simon, what are some of the things that clients are asking for at the moment, given what's going on in the world, as they're maybe trying to make smarter projects?
So I fully agree with the point said there, and my interesting observation is that COVID in general, and then I'll get to particularly answering your point, in my view, has become the first real driver for digital transformation we've seen in organizations. Up until now, it would be something we've discussed at board level and often perceived as being lip service slightly. You invest what you need to keep your systems going. But then what we saw is those companies that really did embrace some of this technological change have been able to smooth through a slightly easier this transition period. And in other cases, we saw mass rollout of platforms that would have been taking a lot longer to do so, and change programs happen within a matter of days. So my example being Microsoft Teams. I know many of us use that. I've heard of one large organization we work with where they had a change program to roll that out over 9 months, but they did it in 6 days instead because of necessity, and the staff kind of coped with it, which is kind of a fantastic achievement. But also it kind of raises the question, are we going to be leaving behind or more digitally isolating a lot of people who aren't able to embrace that tech? But to answer your question more kind of completely, what are we seeing people ask for? So a lot of it is around how they can continue and sustain their operations in this environment, noting the fact that getting people to site is going to be harder. How can you de-risk that activity? How can you allow people that are in the existing sites or the assets, because of course you're looking at a generating network, the asset base is quite large and dispersed. How can you use those to do more of the tasks on the ground without having to bring in specialists all the time? And that's been a big driver for what we've seen, along with how can you do more with what you've got, which is also hard to do if you haven't got the information or asset certainty about your networks and your asset base in general. So it's a big part around, well, now we're in this place, we've adopted Teams, that's fantastic. But what does that mean in terms of how do we bring that more consumer-facing side of our IT infrastructure and bring it into having an actual business where we can use similar concepts to provide efficiencies in our asset operations?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. We've had a question come in, a very broad question, but maybe people have strong opinions on this. Is the industry as a whole working fast enough to reach net zero? Kevin, you've mentioned working with one or two others. Do you see yourselves as sort of outliers at leading the charge at the front, or are there lots of people doing similar things to yourself?
What we've found in the detailed work we've done over the last year or so is that there is aspiration, but the amount at which the challenge has been embraced varies quite considerably across the sector. So we do feel as though we're leading the charge, but we feel as though there's a lot of people pulling on the rope in the same direction, and that's very encouraging. This is why we're working alongside ProLogis to try and promote that across the sector as a whole. I do think the word that Uwe used is a key word, which is accelerate. And one thing that's come from the pandemic is that it has accelerated the need for us all to respond much more aggressively to move the low carbon agenda forward. And I think just over the last 6 months that has happened. So if there are any good things to come out of things like the pandemic, I think this is one of them. I think the industry is moving forward very aggressively, which is great.
Yeah, and having gone through that yourselves and started that in the last year or so, what would be your advice from any lessons learned to others that are maybe starting or advising other developer clients of how to move towards more sustainable projects in the future?
I think as always, communication is the key. We work in big team environments continually in the construction industry. and it's getting the right people alongside you and around you who can genuinely drive things forward. So we're past the stage of making the right sort of noises and aspiration, and we're into now delivering, and that's what we're all about, and that's what we're really encouraging all our stakeholders to join us on that journey.
Yeah. I just wanted to touch on electric vehicles, because there are some interesting companies that are bringing in drivetrains and bigger batteries and things like that into lorries, but there's also getting staff to site at some large facilities, and that increasingly they will be driving their own private EVs. Is that something that you're tracking as part of your work, Simon?
Absolutely, yeah. So Arab, we do a lot of work in EV space and EV master planning and working out that kind of distribution and how that will work and what that really brings and adds to the net zero agenda. But for me, the actual interesting question kind of goes a level above that, because obviously electric vehicles consume off the network, and you've got then a question of how do you have that distribution of energy, and what's that mean for having potentially, your car could become a local storage of energy, which we know that for offshore wind and other things, it's very hard to actually store some of that intermittent energy generation. So how does that add? But as I say, going a level above and saying, well, great, in order to sustain the targets of electric vehicles, that requires substantial reinforcement of our network. Plus, if you combine that, more importantly, in a bit of a whole systems thinking approach with this drive for having heat pumps, a vast majority of them, as it said in the 10-point plan, being installed each year over the next couple of years, which leads to the electrification of heat. How's that going to work on top of EVs? And also generally everyone loving electricity, because gas is the faceless thing you don't often see in your house because it just does your hot water. So it's a realization that it might be fantastic to electric vehicles. Big fan of them. You might have seen the news just this morning. Elon Musk has just become the third richest person in the world, primarily because of his Tesla shares. So it's a big thing. It's going to happen. Can't deny that. But the important part is, how does that fit into the whole energy systems thinking? It's impossible to get wide-scale rollout of EVs unless we consider how that couples with the electrification of heat, the conversion of the gas network, other baseline technologies like nuclear, and how do they couple together is for me the really important question.
Yeah, Elon Musk is having quite a week, isn't he, with
SpaceX as well. Yeah,
SpaceX landing at the space station and all sorts of other things. No, that's fascinating. Thank you very much. And we asked in the first panel about sort of budgets and what it's like, trying to buy and sell tech in this market at the moment, which is always interesting with so many big fundamental shifts going on. Uwe, tell us a little bit about how those conversations are going. I can see people wanting change, but are they prepared to pay for it?
Yeah, that's obviously an interesting question as well. So we feel that we've come to a point where people are actually starting to spend money on productive data-informed solutions. So which is new. So I've been in this industry for 2 years now. Very much started at a point where people were trying out what IoT could do. So really trying to gain this understanding of what the tech really is and enables you to do. Now this has changed. I think the one client I mentioned before is one example of how this is being taken into production. But it also has changed looking at the service industry around commercial real estate, how they are embracing. I had this example with Integral and JLL, how the likes of Integral and JLL are embracing tech these days to make engineering operations more efficient, to dispatch less people to site, which has a cost element and then also has this green agenda element. So yes, people are spending money now to improve services and to make services more efficient and greener, and that is new. That is very much new. And also to that point, on the investor side of things for real estate, I see that people are tendering now for solutions that enables their properties to have green tech to be used by tenants and occupiers. So that's new as well and interesting as well. And then given that warehouse example, also here, we see people are spending money to make operations more efficient. So yes, all of this is happening, and all of this is rather recent. So I think we've come to this point where things start to change.
Yeah, hearing a lot of people saying we've seen X number of years growth and progress in a few months. Kevin, how do you approach this as a business when it comes to changing the way that you've always done things to adopt new practices, new operations? Is there an R&D budget? Is there a sort of green budget? How do you tackle that sort of thing?
Well, we've been looking at our products very closely over the last 12 months to the point whereby we designed our roof layouts to maintain good daylight provision within the units, which promotes low energy use. But we've actually put a significant increase of available roof area for PV arrays, where all our buildings now are designed to accommodate full PV array across the whole building. We're doing a huge amount of work on energy centres to both supplement grid supply and indeed add to grid supply. And we're looking at various technologies, whether that's green gas into engines, whether that's batteries, and other forms of energy generation. We now put in more EV charging points into our building, and we put in expansion of that EV charging facility in all of our car parking areas. And we're currently researching how we can facilitate the inevitable incoming EVs on the heavy goods vehicles. So it's a very fast-moving world, and we're very keen to get our base build product there to facilitate our customers achieving their own net zero carbon aspirations, which they inevitably have. And I think that's one area where we're really looking to improve communication and coordination with end users. And then some of the technologies that Uwe and Simon have been presenting and discussing come into a fully coordinated approach between the developer of the base building and the operator of the building, so that the final entity becomes a very efficient, low carbon product.
Yeah, and from a cost point of view, does that come at a premium, all of the above, and how does that play out? Is the onus on you, or is the onus on the tenant to pay more for that in service charge and rent?
To be honest, it doesn't always necessarily have to come with a significant cost. It just needs to be smart. So you can actually bring in a lot of these initiatives without it necessarily having a high cost associated with it. And what we are doing more and more is communicating with our customers and having that discussion from the outset. What do they want to achieve in our buildings in their own business drivers? And then there is a commercial discussion, as always, in the round. But I don't think that should be any barrier. And I think that the stakeholders should have the same drive and ambition in terms of satisfying the low carbon requirements as we move forward. And as I said earlier, the energy piece is a huge item, and we're doing a great amount of research into that right now.
Yeah, Simon, do you want to add your thoughts on the sort of the cost and the ROI models?
Absolutely. So there's also in general sometimes a bit of a misconception that greener and smarter equals cheaper upfront, which we know is not the case. If you were to use green energy, it's sometimes a bit more of a premium at the moment. Same with if you want to invest in having a smarter building, there will always be more of a cost than if you weren't to do it in the initial capital outlay. But the real important thing for me is how we can think of a bit more of a full life cycle approach, because it might cost you more up front, but if you track it down the road, and especially for built assets, residential, commercial real estate, you'll be using them for 20, 30, 50, even longer years. The return on investment there is in the long-term play and what it means for efficiency. And for me, the overarching part is that if we're developing buildings and assets at the moment that are not considering some of the concepts we'd associate with digital twins, which is really having kind of a connected physical digital asset, then all you're doing is creating a dumb asset for the future. And that's not helpful for anyone. Do you want to be that poor cousin on the block that is the only one that doesn't have some kind of smart ecosystem, when in 10 years' time it's become the norm for you to have that type of facility? So for me, it's about that. Why are any assets being created today that aren't at least considering these concepts? They're often value engineered out, but they shouldn't be. And think of a full life cycle problem here that initially you're going to have an upfront investment, fine, just like with all this green industrial work that's happening of the 10-point plan. But long term, for the sustainability of the planet and for yourself as a business, and probably your commercial social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, sorry, and probably what your shareholders think of you, you need to be doing these things. And that's kind of, I think, a non-negotiable if you look at it in reality.
Yeah. Do we get to a stage there where you can put a value on that digital twin in the same way as you would value the bricks and mortar?
Absolutely. And so incidentally, there's a piece of work that happened fairly recently where someone tried to do a valuation of Highways England's data asset, the value of the data associated. And their network is, a good number of hundreds of millions. But it turned out that the data component, if you were to recognize on the balance sheet, was about, I'm not going to got the exact figures to hand, but a good 20% of the total balance sheet. And it's like, well, does that mean then that we're going to start to see that data is going to be recognized on the balance sheet? And now we know accounting standards take, I'm going to say 7 years, 10 years or so to catch up with things, but it won't be long until you start seeing that as a requirement accounting processes, which takes me to an interesting part. There's a large infrastructure project happening at the moment that we're involved in. And I was speaking to them about what they were doing, and their response was, just kind of in time in the conversation, that, we're actually building a digital asset. It just happens the physical assets coming alongside it. And you think, well, that's interesting. The mindset of some of these large capital projects is you're actually building digital first and the physical comes alongside it. And therefore, if we're not considering this on the balance sheet, what does that mean? And to take that one step further forward, imagine you're a commercial real estate developer and you're not considering some of these principles right now. So you create a dumb asset for the future. But in 5-10 years' time, when it's a need to recognize data on the balance sheet and you don't have that, or insurance companies and lenders say, unless you have a digital twin, I'm not going to lend you money, or I'm not going to insure your building. What have you got? You suddenly got a huge amount of housing stock or residential or building stock or assets that are just completely untenable for people to use. And therefore, it kind of boils back to, we can't really predict where this is going to go in terms of the requirements. But everybody will know that data, maybe it's the new asbestos rather than new oil, no one really knows, is going to have some intrinsic value if it's processed and it's used in the correct form. So how do we respond to that?
Yeah. We've had another couple of questions. Wellbeing initiatives are high on the office sector agenda. Is the industrial and logistics sector playing catch up? Kevin, you mentioned about changing your roofs, getting more daylight in. Is there a sort of well-being aspect to that and other things that you're doing at the moment?
Interestingly, over the last 3 to 4 months, we have been looking at the wellbeing initiative and how it can apply to the office content of the logistics sector. Office content is increasing in our buildings. And it's certainly something that is being considered. Whether we move quickly towards a full wellbeing certification and accreditation, we haven't yet established, but it is high on the agenda at the moment, and it's plan to make.
Yeah, something that you've seen applications of your sensors or anything in the projects you're working on?
Oh, well-being applications are definitely important in the commercial real estate world. So I can absolutely confirm that. But it's both around internal air quality, typically, where you do things like relative humidity sensing to be sure you're not contributing to infection spread risk, as an example. But then also simple things such as giving people the opportunity to voice an opinion or a concern, maybe at the touch of a button or the click of a button, or asking for product. So, anything to help the experience around offices is high up on people's agendas, for sure. I maybe haven't, in the industrial sector, I'm not quite aware of as much of that just yet, but that may be personal perception as well.
Yeah, so Simon, is this something that's on the agenda when you're round the project table with the rest of the team in the work you're doing?
Hugely so, yeah. And I think it's undeniable that this is such an important part of every project. For us, it has probably a bit more of a special place because I don't know how many of you are that familiar with Arup, but we're owned in trust by our employees rather than by shareholders. So you could say we're kind of like a John Lewis or Waitrose in our ownership model. And therefore, we're much more purpose-driven and people-driven in what we do. So, for example, sustainability development goals are core fundamentally to how we operate and everything. I know that's a sustainability concept, but even in our latest strategy that we've released to the market, our tagline is sustainable development is everything. And that's fundamental in the way we operate. And that goes down to all the facets, including well-being of occupants of a building and how we can consider that. So yeah, fundamentally, the way we consider this, it's something that necessarily needs to always be considered, and it's forefront of our minds when we develop.
And are you seeing that in industrial and logistics projects as well, or is it still very much the speciality of office discussions?
It kind of varies across all sectors, and the reason I answer it like that is it really depends on the maturity of the client and the maturity of their thinking, and who is the procuring or the guiding mind from their side. A lot of it for us is actually kind of providing the insights and saying, well, if you haven't thought of that, can we consider it, and seeing how it goes. But as with all things, similar to kind of what I was saying a second ago around considering data as an asset on the balance sheet, or just the concepts of a digital twin, these things can quite easily be value engineered out when it's a hardline person looking at the bottom line cost of an asset and saying, scrap that line. But again, it depends on the sector, really.
Yeah. Another question there, is building spec and age less important than location when considering last mile logistics? Kevin, we hear a lot about last mile logistics, and there's been a Prologis that you're working on white papers with. They did a paper recently on retail being repurposed for last mile logistics, and things like out of town shopping centres, retail parks. Is this something that you're looking at, and is it just location that matters there rather than spec?
Unfortunately, Paul, I'm the wrong person to ask that question. My development colleagues will give you a far more articulate response than I will be able to. So I wouldn't really like to comment directly on the development side, but clearly it is becoming part of the portfolio and will be on the agenda in terms of building delivery in the short term. Yeah. There is certainly a lot of discussion out there on the delivery of those right now.
Yeah, absolutely. When we had our retail event recently, and there were people saying it was already starting to happen in terms of some of those retail parks just flipping over into click and collect and deliveries. That's very interesting. Simon, just wanted to come back to you. One of the concepts that we discussed before today was around open energy. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and why we should watch out for that?
Absolutely. So linked to an organization or an agenda I mentioned earlier called the Energy Data Task Force, they, through UKRI, have launched a number of competitions to see how we can manifest that in the real world. One of those competitions is called Modernizing Energy Data Access, or MEDA for short, and it's looking at how we can run a proof of concept, or really go through those stages of agile development to open up the energy ecosystem and what that means. There's two organizations within that are actively doing the phases at the moment and putting out various concepts. But the one I'll particularly reference is the words you just said there about open energy, an organization called Icebreaker One, who are really piloting it. And I think from our perspective as Arab, this is a really fascinating venture. So it's not any credit for us at all. It's really pointing at them and saying to the audience, it'd be interesting for you to look at, is that they are trying to replicate the open banking standard. And if you have been familiar with or seen the trends around open banking, it's really the platform that has enabled interchange of data between various banks in the financial sector. So if you're, let's say, NatWest or Barclays, you probably have noticed on your app on your phone, you can now load in other banks into that app. So you can show, your NatWest account and your Barclays app, for example. Fundamentally impossible before open banking came. And as a consumer, you don't really notice any more than you can now access everything in one app. But under the hood, that's just a fundamental shift to the sector. Now, if we transpose that into energy, and that's what open energy, the Icebreaker One agenda is looking to do, how will that transform the sector? And for me, I think the ramifications are massive. It could completely flip the market dynamics. So whereby at the moment, we are only consumers in the market. And what I mean by that is all of us here will pay our electricity bill to our, pick your energy as a provider, and that will be for what we use. And it's kind of a transactional basis. You may or may not have a smart meter. You might do them by hand every now and then, but that's how much we interact. If, for example, we were allowed to interchange data in a way Open Energy is suggesting, it could open up completely new opportunities and propositions for us as consumers. So one crude example would be, let's say you could actually put your energy usage out in the open market and the providers could bid on having you as a customer. So saying what your usage is and they could bid for you instead. So flip the dynamics, so an active participant, which means in theory, you could change energy provider every 15 minutes, every 15 seconds, really, depending on a whim on who's got the best rates based on who's giving you the best price. Now, for me as a consumer, that is a radical change, because open banking arguably could do the same thing. Imagine you could shift your mortgage between providers every 15 minutes, depending who's giving you the best rate. What would that do for us as a market dynamic? So that's really exciting, and I'd encourage everyone here to have a look at that. I'll post the link in the chat window to their site so you can research some more, alongside another report I'd love to share around Arup's view on the energy system in 2035 and where it's going to go. But I'll post that now.
Yeah, that's something I was going to draw on for the rest of the panel towards the end of this discussion around that sort of blue sky thinking, if you like, that throwing the eye forward of some predictions of where we might end up. So it's good you mentioned that 2035 report. And when it comes to Internet of Things and sensors, Uwe, what's some of the the big goals that you've got as a business, and what's the direction of travel for the next few years, do you think, generally for this part of the industry?
Yeah, I do believe that currently we do see the first benefit of what technology can do for sustainable operations. So it's just really we're only just scratching the surface. I think we're seeing the first anecdotal, if you will, examples of what can happen, and that those are sort of the slides I showed. These they weren't planned for, right? They sort of developed. That was people trying things out, deciding to create services based around that. No one foresaw that 2 years ago, right? That's my perception. So I think we'll start learning now. I think we will start learning. We will really actively look for these efficiencies in operations specifically, where we can save on carbon for transporting people, save on energy for operating buildings. Just being the enabler for sustainable everything. Really, that's I believe how far it goes. So we may currently be using this in buildings and for distribution networks mainly, right? Which is the case. Yeah. That doesn't mean that it won't be used in transport going forward, which it will be. I'm quite convinced of that. We may see first, what was happening in buildings 2 years ago is now happening in transport with people trying things out. So our vision is very broad. We literally think we will be everywhere.
Yeah, and Kevin, when it comes to construction in industrial logistics, where do you think we're headed? Sustainability, smart wise, the next 12, 24 months. What do you expect to see?
I think that the energy issue is probably the highest item on the agenda in terms of the medium term, moving to net zero carbon in operational use, which is working very closely with our customers, and the base building, which is what we deliver into the marketplace, is keeping pace with the rapid change in technology that's happening with our customers in terms of their automation, their robotics, and how they want to operate our buildings. So I think the communication piece with our operators is key, and we will end up working in a much more coordinated manner, so we have a holistic approach to building.
Yeah, well, that feels like a nice place to draw things to a close. Thanks to all our panelists for a great discussion there. Hope you enjoyed that wherever you're watching. Thanks again to our partners today for putting this event on with us, to Node, Bruntwood Works, Arup, Molecom and Mills and Reeve. Please do hang around for the networking. The bar's open in the other room, so you can stay and enjoy a chat. We have more PlaceTech events coming up next year. In the meantime, do get in touch with your stories for placetech.net and the PlaceTech Weekly, or if you'd like to talk to us about getting involved in our events next year, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the team. Thank you again to our panelists. Thanks everyone for coming today, and I shall see you in the other room. Thank you.